paddlewheelers off the river, and those big brick steels that were there, that's where they would tie those river boats up to, and they would run parallel to the river, and then they would let them off, and that's how the people went that way. Those paddle wheelers came in not only from the Louisville area, they came all the way down from Madison, different ones, and they were day trips for people to come in and out. There was also, you could see there was a small craft dock where people would come in, and then there was a walking bridge that you could come in. So, again, David liked to name everything after himself. The side wheeler was named the Rosalind, and so that was one of the ways that they would leave from the Louisville docks, and they would bring people in. And the SS Idlewild, that was a really big boat they used for many years to take people back and forth. And of course, we know her today. She is our belle of Louisville. So she has a real history with Rosalind. There was another way that they brought people in, and it was called the Vivian Iii. This is not a real picture of the Vivian, but this is very similar to what she probably looked like. She was a wooden powerboat. It would take the paddle wheelers 2 hours to get to Rosalind from downtown to Jeffersonville. She could do it in an hour. That's how fast she was. She could cut the time in half. So when the people were staying up there, a lot of times families would go and they would stay maybe a week, maybe a month, maybe all season, all summer they would stay. The men were back in Louisville or Jeffersonville working. They would grab the Vivian on Friday nights and go stay with the family on the weekends, and then on Mondays or Sunday evenings they'd get back on the speedboats, the fast boats, and they would go and they'd go back home. So they would spend time like that. So she was also in use there. They had ferry boats that went across. I mentioned Rosalind before. There was a ferry that went from there. And then the smaller skiffs. If you were on the creek itself, they had a pier there, and you could bring in the smaller boats and you'd be able to get on and off with the pier there. Now the third way to get there was by land. And just like I explained earlier, if you wanted to go into Rosalind today, you would go down 62, you would go through the park, and you would go to Trail 3, and you would be able to walk down this 1 mile steep cliff or road. Back in the day, you can see, here's the cars. At the top, there's the big road that they were driving these cars down and parking all along the creek. The creek is to your right over there, it goes out to the river. Now once they drove in, they were still on the wrong side of the creek. How'd they get across? Well, they had a suspension bridge. And the suspension bridge, it was 50 feet over because, you know, it did flood even back then. Maybe not as bad as 37, but there were floods. So they built it up high over the creek. It cost 25 cents for an adult and 10 cents for the kids to be able to go in and enjoy the amusements that they put into the park. And the big story about this is it was a swinging bridge. So you could actually get the thing moving. Steve, I know you would be that guy who would do this too. Because they wanted to make their kids, their wives, their girlfriends scream, and they would just rock it, and pretty soon the whole thing would be swinging back and forth. So that's the swinging bridge of Rosalind. Now the park itself, this is a photo, not a photo, it's a drawing actually. This was the idea of what they wanted to do. So you can see here in the bottom right, they have the entrance with the pillars, the 3 pillars, the hotel behind it. Then along the creek, they had a row of cottages. And then across diagonally across, they called it the Walkway of Roses. And they had this gigantic archway all the way across the park that had these beautiful climbing red roses. Of course, he would have red roses, you know, David. And then when you get back over into the other area, you have the amusements, and you have dining halls, and you have there's a baseball stadium and a swimming pool, and there was plans, you can see at the very top up there were plans to do a golf course out there too, but that never happened. That didn't happen. So that's kind of the layout of Rosalind. And you can see the river here, and then you can see 14 Mile Creek cutting that behind it. Again, giving it that illusion that you're on an Now, this place was self-sufficient. They had their own water system. They had their own electrical generating plant. And if you think about it, this is in 1920s. They're in the middle of nowhere, and it's like one of the top places in the entire country that had all of this stuff out in the middle of nowhere. They also had these cottages. There were 24 four-room cottages, again, that lined the river, so you would be down by the water, and you would get the breezes, the cool breezes coming off the water in the evenings. And if anybody talks about Rosalind, they will always tell you about the swimming pool. The swimming pool was built. It was an Olympic size. It was the first pool in the entire country that had a water filtration system like this. And I will tell you, I guess to say that the workmanship that was being done back in those days, that pool was still holding water in 2012 when they went into, and they had to drain it. That's how good it had been built. It was still holding water. There's no place at a picnic around anywhere around here that I know of doesn't have pony rides. If you remember, remember going to old church picnics and stuff, they always had the ponies coming in. So they had ponies. They also had a wooden roller coaster called the Racing Derby, and they said that if you were around the park when this thing was running, you would hear that clickety-clack, clickety-clack, clickety-clack. You could hear it all throughout the park. You could hear the wooden roller coaster. They had a dining hall that seated 500 people. Again, I go back. They had to have been one of the biggest employers in the entire area in Indiana. And again, it's out in the middle of nowhere. You've got to make an effort to get there. You're just not passing through. So they did have this infrastructure that was just totally amazing back then. They had a skate and dance pavilion. So where during the daytime they would have roller skating. It was a wooden floor. At night they would push all of this back. They would take all the equipment out. They would bring in live bands. They would put salt on the floor, and it turned into a dance hall. And it was a wonderful, wonderful place. And they had really, very popular live bands that would come in for these dances that they would have there. They had exotics. Believe it or not, you're out in the middle of nowhere in Indiana, and they had birds, exotic birds. They had monkeys. They had an alligator. And they had this big old black bear named Teddy Roosevelt. Now, Rosalind, where the amusements are and everything, is down on a floor next to the river. It's right there. But up behind there, if you came in through the gates, the hotel is right here, and you would walk straight through behind the hotel and look up, and that's the view you're going to see. Because this is called the Devil's Backbone. And it's a large bluff that goes along the river, just upriver from where the Rosalind is flat. So Devil's Backbone has some real stories behind it. So in 1873, the governor of Indiana started hearing all these stories about what was going on up on top of this bluff above Rosalind. And so he sent his geologist down there and said, you need to go down there and find out what the heck's going on because we keep hearing all these stories. Well, he went down and he found there was man-made limestone walls on top of this bluff. They were 150 feet long, 75 feet wide or high, and there were ditches and moats. In other words, there was a castle sitting on top of the Devil's Backbone at Rosalind. Where did it come from? Well, this is actually a drawing on the right side here. This is actually E.T. Cox's, the state geologist. That was the drawing. And he indicated, yes, there are some natural walls that were there, rock walls, but he also notes there were artificial walls that were set up around the top of this bluff. And to the right there is the river, and 14 Mile is kicking around back behind it. So that was his initial drawing, and this is another photo that you can kind of get a better idea of where that fort or where that castle was. Where did it come from? Well, there's a bunch of stories about where this could have possibly come from, but I'm going to share today the story that I heard and the story I like to tell. So, to do that, we need to go way back, and we're going to look at the Moonite people and Prince Madoc and the Welsh Indians. And this is a story all about Rosalind and that whole area. And if anybody here, has anybody heard of Madoc? Yeah, see? I never heard of him until I moved here. I'm originally from St. Louis, so when people started talking to me about this guy, I was like, oh my gosh, how could this be true? But a lot of people really do believe that it is true. And I'm just going to share it with you, and you can make your own mind up. So, you really got to go back for this one. 562, and we're looking at this young man, Prince Madoc. He was a Welsh royalty. He was probably the 14th child of the king of Wales, and that he, when his father died, he knew he was not going to get any kind of inheritance. He wasn't going to get any money. He wasn't going to get any land because he had all these other brothers ahead of him. And so what he decided to do was to take off and go find his own place in life. And so he packed up his family, and he packed up his servants, and he packed up some friends, and they all set out from Wales, and they followed a route similar to what this looks like here, down past Spain, Africa, across the Atlantic, and they landed, believe it or not, in Mobile Bay, Alabama. Once they got there, they started moving up the river systems. And they went up through Montgomery, Mobile, Muscle Shoals, and Chattanooga, and all those places have these forts, these stone forts that people were finding along the way. And the last one was right out here on the Dallas Backbone at Rosalind on the Ohio River. Great story, isn't it? Now, what happened to these Indians we talked about earlier in the 1800s when we got the Louisiana Purchase? We started pushing all people into the indigenous peoples. They started getting pushed further west. Well, the story goes that these Indians, when Lewis and Clark in 1804 set up their first winter camp, they set it up in Fort Mandan, which is up in the Dakotas, and they found a tribe of people up there. They believe are the descendants of the Welshmen and Madoc. And why would they believe that? Well, when they started looking at these things, they had people there that had blonde hair and blue eyes. Some of them had Welsh words that they were speaking. They had a harp that was very similar to a Celtic harp. They also had artwork and different things, religious structures that were very similar to Celtic beliefs. And so they really did think that this could be a possibility. And a lot of people still believe this is a possibility. They also found that the Welsh coracle is a type of boat and a type of structure, and they found that the Indians there were using something very similar. Something very similar. There are people here in Louisville, if you're interested in looking at this story even more. A friend of mine, Lee Pennington, he is the president of the Ancient Kentucky Historical Association. He has written books and papers on this. He's gone to Wales and researched this. John Filson wrote about Madoc back in the day when he was doing, there's papers through the Lewis and Clark people. And so you can go back and you can kind of start tracing history back through some of these things. And then you can go to YouTube and put in Madoc, and you will find all kinds of information on him if you're interested. But let's get back to Rosalind as it started progressing through the rest of, from 23 to 37 is basically the heydays of it. So we all know in the 20s, when David Rose purchased this property and he started marketing this, people had it. They had money. They were able to go and they wanted to play and they wanted to do all these things, and it was a huge amount of money that was coming into the park because of it. There was also Prohibition going on at that time, and David Rose was an extremely legal person. He never wanted to do anything to say that he was not. Well, that's not to say they didn't have a speakeasy under the hotel that no one wanted to really talk about, but they did. And then the Great Depression came in, and that first year, 31, he started losing money. People weren't able to go to the park, they weren't able to do all these things. And so there was a little bit of a loss, but he still knew, this is gonna come around. I'm gonna definitely keep moving forward, I'll keep investing in the park, we'll come out of the Depression, and we'll be able to go ahead and restart up and keep things moving. Unfortunately, in 1937, as anybody from the Louisville area knows, we had the Great Flood. And with that, 53.74 feet was where the water level was. Today, I looked it up, 13.08. So you can see, if you looked at the river today, it's at 13 foot. It was at 53 back then. And so it covered a lot of the area. This is a picture of actually Louisville and the river and how much water was on that. That was on the west end of town. Rosalind was 10 feet underwater. 10 feet underwater. A lot of the structures there were wooden. If anybody's had any issues with or gone through any type of flooding, you understand what I'm saying is not a lot survives when it's not a concrete structure. And there were still some things out there, some bases and things that are still there. But for the most part, Rosalind was pretty well destroyed. And with that, David lost hope. He just said, I don't think I'm going to be able to make a comeback because it's going to have to be, everything's going to have to be rebuilt. And he wasn't real sure, it was still, coming out of the Depression, and if he could build up, and he was getting older, and so he kind of gave up, and he just walked away from Rosalind at that point. And then, in 1940, we were getting into the war, and the munitions, the government came in and wanted to build this munitions plant, and so they bought all of this land over there, and they did it because of how close it was to the river, and they were able to use some of that, the river energy and everything. With that, when they bought all of that land up on the bluff there, near Charlestown, that 118 acres of Rosalind was also purchased. And so the government now owned it. And one of the first things they did was shut it down. And they said nobody could go up the creek. You're not allowed up the creek. This is all security. They dismantled the swinging bridge. The bridge was taken away. So nobody could get from one place to the other. And pretty much it went back to nature. The weeds grew up, the trees fell down, and that's really what happened to it in the 40s and the 50s. And then in the 60s, the government said, what are we doing with this property? We don't need this property anymore. So what they did was they started deeding it back to the state of Indiana. And the first 67 acres, they deeded over to the Clark County 4-H Club. And so all of a sudden, now we've got this property, but Rosalind is still a mess. In '92, the government said, we don't need any of this property anymore, and they gave 4,500 acres to the state of Indiana, and Charlestown State Park was created in that area, along with the 118 acres that was originally Rosalind. When you go there today, they have gone in, and I credit and thank the state and the people who have gone in and really redone this park area. It's never going to turn back into an amusement park. It's never going to be hotels and houses and all the rest of it because you're on that floodplain down there. And so basically when you go now, you will go in by, and there's no piers to go in, like I said earlier, but you go in, you drive in, and you walk down the hill, and this is what you see. And so they've replicated the 3 stone pillars that's out on the river, and they show you all of these little historical things along the way. If you want to go over there and see this, it's really a great way to relive history. They put up these posts all along the area, and these posts now have at different heights these blue markers, and it tells you here at this point is where the water was. Here's where the water was in 37. So it'll show you exactly how deep the water was in the different parts of the park. This is a picture of people getting off at the Belle of Louisville. She was known as the Idlewild back there. But they're coming through the 3 stone pillars, and that's what it looked like back in the day. And you can see the numbers of people that were getting off this boat. And this woman and man over here, they're running. And they're running because they want the best picnic table. People are all the same, aren't they? We all want the best seats in the house. When you go today, this is what you see. This is the entrance to Rosalind. The 3 stone pillars are still there. These old gentlemen are sitting out there in the woods. Again, I go back to the quality of workmanship that was used back in the day when they were building these things. For this to survive, it was 10 feet underwater a number of times when they've had, floods. But you can see the pad in front is kind of cracked and everything, but the 3 stone pillars are still there. Back in the day, this was the way to walk into the park. I showed you this earlier. It was the swinging bridge. Today when you go, this is what you see. That's all that's left of the swinging bridge. It's just the pylons that are there on both sides of the creek. So people do still walk in though, and this is how you get in there today when you come down the big hill. You want to go across this. So this was it was a historical bridge in Indiana, the Portersville Bridge, and in 2011 they took it off the creek up in Indiana and they numbered all the pieces. And then they brought it back down and they put it across 14 Mile Creek, and they basically put it all back together. So when you come in, it's a 1-lane bridge, but yeah, you can still get into Rosalind on this now, and you can do this all you want. It's not going to move. It's not gonna move. The swimming pool, everybody loved the swimming pool at Rosalind. And this is, some scenes from then, from what everybody was having fun. I went over in 2009. We took a crew of people who were in from London doing a documentary on Maddox. And this is what the swimming pool looked like in '09 before they came in. And they had to drain it. It was amazing. I find that part amazing, that they had to drain this pool that had been used in the 1920s and 30s. Again, the workmanship was so good back then. You go today and this is what you see. They've drained the pool, they have filled it with like the little pea gravel so you can walk on it and everything. But this is the pool still there, and you can see some of those posts and they've got those markers on them, so that's how far under. The pool sits up kind of back from the river, so it's a little higher, but that's how far the water was there. And that's what those markers are on those things. The Walkway of Roses. This is not a picture of the Walkway of Roses. It is a picture that I found that I think this is what it looked like from all the descriptions that I saw. And so they had these all the way across, diagonally across the park. They had all of these beautiful climbing roses. They said you could smell these all through the park. It was wonderful. When you go today, they've replicated it. And there's no roses growing, but they do have these pillars with the big archway. And so this beam across the floor here, it says Walkway of Roses across it. And so it's just another reminder of, what it was and what it looked like. They could seat 1,600 people on picnic tables at Rosalind. I go back to the infrastructure of what they had at this park and all of the wonderful things they did in the 20s. If you go today, though, this is what you'll see. And you can see maybe 2 or 3 that survived. I wouldn't want to sit on them. This is the wishing well they had at the park. And this style, and Steve, maybe you know or you've seen them, these styles were popular back in that era. And so there was a pit around it. They had water coming off the top and it cascaded down the rocks. Now, I looked at this picture a number of times, and when I told you they had exotics earlier on, they kept the alligator in there. They kept the alligator in that pit. And that's why that little boy's not coming down. His mother's like, why did you climb up there? This is what it looks like today. That's what's left. So there were things that were left over that, you know, the flood didn't totally destroy. And a lot of the rock or the masonry and the concrete types of things, that's what you're going to see when you go over there. So this is the beginning. Lots of people enjoyed Rosalind. I said that earlier. You saw people getting off the boat. You know, thousands and thousands and thousands of people went to this place and had wonderful times. And to me, that's a big part of why I fell in love with Rosalind. I think it's a very magical place. I think that, you know, you can look at these pictures and you can see the people that went there are just like us. We all like to have a good time. We want to be with family and friends. And these guys, this is from July 4th, 1930. And you can see, you know, they're friends and family, and they're all there. And I was very lucky with this picture. When I did a talk early on, I would have people tell me that their parents had gone there. And sometimes, you know, it was just families enjoying an afternoon at the park. People who went in with their churches, and they went in with their businesses, and they went out for picnics for the day, and they were lovers. There were so many people that got married in Rosalind, and they were getting engaged at Rosalind. I've had people come and tell me my mom and dad met there. I mean, there's a wonderful, wonderful feeling about this whole place for me. And again, this is what it looked like with the hotel and with all the amusements and with the housing and everything. I think it was just a great place. And David Rose had such vision and determination that he was going to create this place for people in the Kentuckiana area to really and truly enjoy it. And now the state of Indiana has done the same thing. You can still go there and you can still imagine what all of this looked like. And so when I wrote my book, Rosalind, an almost accurate account of days gone by, I decided I would use this magical place as the backdrop for my story. The people in it are totally fictional. The situations I put them into are totally fictional. But all of the historical information that you read about, that's all true. And that's why I was able to come here today and tell you a little bit about Rosalind. And so thank you very much for listening, and any questions? Yes?
Did Mr. Rose profit from the sale of the land to the government for the Apple plant?
You know, I'm not sure.